Okay. This is a trip, as you see, October 2019, Friendship Force Dallas to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Actually, there's a little bit more to it than that. We were invited there and to Madison. We didn't have enough people to go. And Aichi, Japan was also invited to those two places, so at different dates. But they didn't have enough to go either. We need a minimum of 10 for these trips. So each one had about 8. So we negotiated a little bit and got together on the same date. So there were Japanese and Dallas people and Iowa and Wisconsin people. So it turned out to be a pretty interesting trip. We met some lovely Japanese people while we were there as well. So we began, this is why we began not in Cedar Rapids, but in Dubuque, because the Wisconsin part was first. I grew up in Wisconsin, so I didn't go there. I had other reasons as well, but I didn't go to the Wisconsin portion. I just met them all in Cedar Rapids. But they were coming from Madison and passed off their Japanese and Dallas people in Dubuque, Iowa, right on the Mississippi. We met in a park and had a nice little lunch and had a little time to walk along the river and see some things. So you see about where they are. Dubuque is right on this corner of 3 states and not very far from either one of those towns. So we had a chance to look at the Mississippi, which is in some locks. There are some dams on the Mississippi at this point. And pardon me? I heard somebody say something.
You know what? You might be hearing. Okay, I'm going to mute myself. I think that's probably, you're hearing the other people in the other room. So let me just mute myself. Sorry, Mary.
Yeah, that'll be fine. So here's a view of the Mississippi and of Dubuque. And we'll see a little bit as we go along. I think I've showed these butterfly pictures when we had the Cape May program with the butterflies, but there are lots of them there that day. And you see some of the Japanese ladies here with their hosts. So just a little bit about Dubuque. We were just there shortly. This is along the river. We got there a little bit early. And this is a brewery in the background here. And nice river walk. They've cleaned up the place and it's a nice area. They'd had a little rain that day. I'm missing one. Let me see here. Yeah, there it is. Okay, I wanted to show you this picture of the shot tower, which is this in the background. And I'll bet there's nobody here who knows what a shot tower is. Maybe there is, but I'm going to tell you. And it's one of the last remaining shot towers in the United States and is on the National Register of Historic Places, as are most of the buildings you're going to see in this presentation. What it is, it's a way to make shot that goes in guns. And they take lead at the top of it and melt it. And as it melts, it forms little balls and drops down into a pan of water, which solidifies it. So that's called a shot tower. Who knew, right? And also some pictures of the winery or brewery, I'm sorry. The thing to see in Dubuque is St. Luke's United Methodist Church. This particular window was commissioned by the parents of a girl who had died young, and they wanted a commemoration of her. And these are Tiffany glass windows. There were several St. Luke's before this one. This was founded in 1833, but this building in 1897. The view from across the street. It's famous for these Tiffany glass windows and for its pipe organ, which you see over here. So I want to show you a little bit of the windows. I had an extra fun thing to happen in this church because these lighting fixtures were made by my family business in Wisconsin. My father started Manning Lighting back when I was 12 years old. My brother was the president of it after my father retired, and now his son is running it. So we're 3 generations of Mannings, and there they were. And I recognize them because they're in thousands of churches all over the United States, and they're pretty obvious to me anyway. I recognize them. I did a quick email to my nephew and he said, yep, that's them. So let me show you some of the Tiffany windows. They form one side of the church. The other side has offices and stuff, so it's not a freestanding church. They're from 1896, and I'll bet you know some of the Tiffany glass or have heard of it. There's the Christ Ascension and an angel, and let me see what else we have. A Job. but there are quite a few windows in there. This is the organ. I'll say a bit about that in a minute. The Good Samaritan. Well, what makes a Tiffany window interesting? If you look at it closely, you can see that each piece of glass has shading within it, rather than just have blocks of glass like you usually see in stained glass windows. So these were tributes to various people that people have commissioned. But they're really beautiful windows dating back from the late 1800s. And a couple other pictures in Dubuque. This is the Fenelon Place elevator. And this was built by a fellow, let's see what his name was. Well, I don't have it right in front of me. It's also known as the 4th Street elevator, also on the National Register of Historic Places. There it is, J.K. Graves. J.K. Graves had plenty of money and he lived at the top of the hill. And he got tired of climbing up the steps, so he put in his own private elevator. And after a while, people said, well, we want to ride it too. So he started charging 5 cents to ride the elevator. And so we didn't ride it, but we did see it from the top. And of course, we had a great view of the city from there as well. A view of the clock tower in Main Street. This is the view we had from the top by the Fenelon elevator. This is the Dubuque Courthouse. And it was designed by a guy named Fridolin Heer. And we're going to hear from him again too. It's an interesting building. It's called a Beaux-Art architecture, 190-foot tower. It's just recently been remodeled, and it's quite a showplace. Also on the list of Register of Historic Places. Another little picture of it, but quite a lovely building. Our next stop after Dubuque was to Dyersville, which is not far from there. First of all, to visit the Basilica of Francis Xavier. If you know what a basilica is, it's not a cathedral. It's not quite the same thing. A cathedral is the seat of the bishop of an area. So this is not where the bishop resides. There are about 53 basilicas in the United States. This one was dedicated to Francis Xavier. But a basilica is a place where the Pope can hold Mass if he's visiting in the US. And there are all kinds of special regulations you have to let your church be a basilica. The first thing is that the altar has to be sitting on rock. So this one is, as you can see, it's a beautiful church built by German immigrants. And also along the way, a bishop has to come and consecrate the church. So there are 12 places around the church that have a place where he puts holy chrism on the wall, and those are all marked. So that's the first thing, that's the next thing you have to do to be considered a basilica. So this church, as I say, was made by German immigrants. The altar pieces were carved by people who lived in the area, all these wooden pieces. The altar is Italian marble and Mexican onyx. So it was really a beautiful church for its area. It seats about 1,000. So there are quite a few people that can be held in this church for when the Pope does come. Electric lights were added in 1904. Several artists from the area contributed to various parts of the church, but it's really a beautiful place. One interesting window is this one. It looks very Indian. And of course, there are Fox and Sac Indians in the area. But it was sort of a mistake on the part of the man who made the window, because he was told that St. Francis Xavier was a missionary to the Indians, as in India, East India. And he misunderstood that and made the window to be American Indian designs. So it's kind of a little faux pas that's in the window. But it is now considered a basilica, which was consecrated in 1956. But the thing people know most about Dyersville is the Field of Dreams. And we're going to visit that as well. Here are some of the altars in the basilica before I move on. The Field of Dreams is not far behind, and most of you have probably seen the movie with Kevin Costner. It was filmed in Iowa, and the people who lived here let the movie company build it. The people who made it wanted a little bit different view, so they also bought a part of the farm next to it. So there were 2 farms involved in that, and eventually the little piece of the other farm was bought by these people. And then a movie tourist company bought it in order to make it into a tourist attraction. If you remember the story, Kevin Costner built the field to have the old baseball players come, and if you build it, they will come. You remember that line? That's from that movie. So a little part of this field then belonged to this other people at one point. And it's still used occasionally. They'll put up bleachers for things. They were supposed to have something last summer, but I bet anything it was canceled because of the pandemic. But they were supposed to have the first major league game in Iowa played there last summer, but I don't think that happened. But there are just posters and things that you can see. There was a scene where people were walking out of the cornfield, the old players. So these are some of the things that we saw in this Cedar Rapids area. We've come here now from Dubuque down to Dyersville, which is right here, and down into to Dubuque. The thing about Cedar Rapids that is most important, I guess, is the flood of 2008. This was a whopper. They have a 19-foot flood level. It flooded to 31 and a little bit feet. The whole downtown was flooded. About 10 square miles were flooded, including all of the downtown area, at least through the first floor. So it was really a disastrous thing. They'd had floods in the past, but nothing like this. Cedar Rapids was settled also by Germans, by Bohemians, which we would call Czechs today. There are some other things that I can tell you about, but I'm going to tell you first about the flooding. This map has some placemats. I got place names of things that are important. This is sort of the center of town. This is the island where the government buildings are. Of course, those were all flooded. Let's see what else we have. The city hall, the courthouse, it's called Mays Island. This right here is the Czech Museum, and it was flooded. They lost their whole first floor of artifacts, and we'll see what they did with that to solve that problem a little bit later. This is a picture of what it looks like. This is the interstate right across here. Not too good. There's the Czech Museum. We had the opportunity of viewing the city from Mount Trashmore. This is just what it sounds like. It's the trash heap. It was made into a place where people could bicycle, and it's their little man-made mountain out of their trash. So we were able to go up there. Normally it's closed, but they do have a circular road around it for a bike event that they have once a year. So about 1,300 blocks, but particularly back over in this region, were flooded. And we had a picture of what Cedar Rapids looks like today. There are a number of industries in Cedar Rapids that it's famous for: Quaker Oats, and some meat packing plants, Sinclair. If you remember Collins Radio, some of us in Dallas do, because that turned into TI, Texas Instruments, which then moved to Dallas. They started out in Cedar Rapids. And of course, Grant Wood was from this area, and we'll talk more about him as well. So the Iowa flood started around June 8th of 2008 and ended about July 1st. So that's about 3 weeks of this city being underwater. And it wasn't just Cedar Rapids, it was all of this part of the Midwest, because of heavy rains saturated the soil. And these thunderstorms that kind of like when Hurricane Harvey came, and they just sort of stalled over this area. It just rained and rained. Also, the fields in Iowa farms are tiled. The drainage ditches are tiled to run off into the rivers. And of course, that lets the water run off even faster instead of just trying to sink into these already saturated fields. So it caused the rivers to fill up even quicker. So one of the places that was severely flooded was this area right here, which we visited. Nearly all those houses are out of there now. And they've made it into a memorial park for that flood. And we went and visited it. This is the map of that area. And as I say, nearly all the houses are gone out of there. Instead, they put in this at the end of it. You can see how high. This is 31 feet from where she is standing. the height of the floodwaters in this area. Another view of what it looked like during the flood. The tour that we had of this area in Mount Trashmore and these views in this neighborhood were done by the man who has now put in, the man that was hired by the city to put in flood control after this event. And they've had one smaller flood since then, where they found another place that was a low lying that needed a little bit more work, but mainly they fixed it until they get something higher than 31 feet, I guess. So these are two of our ladies enjoying the walkway around there. Notice all the wildflowers in bloom in the fall. So this is the Maze Island, and from the downtown area, in the downtown area. So we had some lunch up high where we could look out the window and get a view of the city. All this, of course, had been underwater. One of the things we visited was the public library. When we saw this on the list, we were kind of like, why are we going to the public library? Doesn't everybody have a public library? What's so special about that? But it turns out it was special because it was flooded. And the whole downstairs, which was all their adult and reference library, was toast, gone. The children's books on the second floor were saved, but they had agreed to have someone buy that property, and they moved to a new property. So they moved and started a new library from scratch, which is this building on their screen, as you can see it. And they built it to state of the art. So we had a little tour through that, and a really interesting place. Opened on higher ground, as I said, in 2013. Here's our tour guide, and won a lot of architectural and environmental awards. This is their book sorting, their automated book sorting. The books come down here and they're coded so that they just drop into the right bin. And then they're put on carts, and the carts are taken to be placed back in the shelves. Fiction section, and lots of artwork in the building. She's describing what happens on the rooftop and other places in the building, some of the features of the building. These over here are book club packets. I bet a lot of you belong to book clubs. I know I've belonged to some, and sometimes it's hard getting books. So they're in packs of 12. So if your club wants to read a certain book, you check it out, and they're books for everybody. And you don't have to buy them, and they're enough for everyone to go around. So this is her telling us about the top. It's planted. And so it's green space. You can rent it for a wedding or a party or something like that. So it's a living roof, as they call it. It collects rainwater and it helps the air conditioning, available for events. This is one of our Japanese having fun in the library. There are lots of fun things to do for kids and adults as well, if you're interested in the restrooms. The New Bowl Market was another one that was flooded and is now have been restored. They tore out the buildings in front of it and have a nice little park area in front of it. And it's a farmer's market. The Paramount Theater was a Czech building that was in the downtown area. It also flooded. They had a beautiful organ in it. Oh, I didn't tell you about the other organ, did I? Oh, well. The organ in it was floating up onto the stage. After the water subsided, it was in a whole different place. But this is a Bohemian crystal in the lobby of it. As I say, it was settled a lot by Czechs who made these beautiful crystal things. This is in another area, the ceiling part of the auditorium, and the downstairs where the restrooms are. They don't have these fancy names in the Paramount. But we had a tour of that building as well. We're up on the stage now and can play like being stars in our own right. But very fancy, as you see. The Czech Museum was actually my favorite place in Cedar Rapids, and it's one of their top attractions. As you see, the Czech Museum was really badly underwater. And what they did was, after the water subsided, they picked it up and put it on rollers and moved it over here and moved it onto a higher place. So here it is on rollers, and it ended up being on top of this, and it's pretty safe now from the water. And this is a picture from inside of it, looking at the front door outward. Again, one of those beautiful chandeliers. And this would be about the same place I'm standing, but looking the other direction. So this would be your entrance into the various parts of the museum. Of course, there's a lot about the Czech culture in it, now divided into the Czech Republic and Slovakia, and they had their borders changed many times with different countries invading. We certainly saw that in Romania, as you remember from my last talk. So this whole central area of Europe changed borders quite a bit. And they just had to decide what we were fighting for when this was from World War II. So many of them came at different times when there were wars. When the Russians came and invaded, World War II, World War I. Of course, the Bohemia and Moldavia, which is the other part or the other ethnic part of the Czech Republic, has these beautiful wood carvings and all kinds of ceramics and glassware that's famous all over the world, the Bohemian crystal. I thought these were just darling. They dress your baby in a Czech outfit and have their picture made as newborns. Aren't they darling? I just absolutely fell in love with them. They are so cute. This, of course, a little gypsy guy. There was a guitar exhibit there too during the time we were there that I really enjoyed. And this is from way back, since I'm a musician or former musician, this is the back of this, or the outside of this lute from way back. And there's something on the very modern end and everything in between. But you see some of the beautiful work on some of these guitars and stringed instruments. This was done in silver, a Hawaiian guitar. This one I think is interesting. I wouldn't know it was a guitar unless it had a sign there. Made of shell, one made of shells. This is an interesting, this is my favorite, made of license plates. But very interesting ones. This has got all kinds of doodads on it, shells and horn and everything. And being a former folk dancer, I especially like the national dress exhibit. This is on a turntable. And I wanted to take some still pictures too, because I like them so well. I have all kinds of generic costumes or generic national dress myself, not necessarily, I've got an apron from Hungary and a hat from Turkey and so on and so on. But these are all from various parts of Czechoslovakia, and it's a very mountainous country. So if you lived in one valley, your neighbors in the next valley might have different food, different customs, maybe a little different accent, certainly different clothes. So they're beautiful, beautiful clothes that are Czech, from the Czech variety. So here are just a couple of them in still pictures. And of course, all this embroidery and applique would have been hand done. I'm not sure I could sit still long enough to get together some of these. If you happen to like ornaments, Christmas ornaments, their gift shop is an absolute must-see. There are all kinds of glass things and Christmas tree things and all kinds of things that you can buy in their gift store that are Bohemian. Normally, I wouldn't put in the things that we do with a Friendship Force group coming, but we do have a dinner in someone's home who's not hosting. This particular host, but I wanted to show you this because I thought it was really interesting myself. Her hobby was making tamari balls, and they are Japanese. And they're made with a ball like of twine, and you put all these things on them. So she had a display of them, and I thought they were so interesting, I wanted to show them to you. One of the other ladies looking at them, and a book of them. And here's our Japanese lady, and of course she was very familiar with them. These are my hosts right here. She also made a dinner that was very unusual. She made tapas. And as we loaded up our plate, she had about a dozen altogether. So we started with soup and little doodads of this and that, and she kept bringing out and bringing out and bringing out. So you might think about that sometime if you're having a party to serve tapas, if you're really a good cook. She made everything herself. I was really impressed. So other places that you might want to visit in Cedar Rapids, the Bohemian section of town, the African American Museum, the Czech Village, the Nature Center, the Art Museum, and these are some that we didn't get to. Bruce Moore House, we did go by it in the evening. It's also one of the big attractions in Cedar Rapids, built in 1864 on 26 acres. Some lovely gardens. I say we did drive through the estate, but didn't get to go in. But it was a the home of 3 families over generations, and was finally willed to the city. It's an historic place also. Another place we went to is the University of Iowa Health Center. Another one of those, why would we be visiting a hospital? Well, again, there was a reason for it. When you visit people who live there, they sometimes show you things that aren't on the top of the list, so you never know. So we visited the Children's Center at the University of Iowa in Iowa City, which is kind of just south of Cedar Rapids. There's a lot of children's art in the Children's Museum. These, of course, are blocks, and there are all sorts of mobiles and children's art all through the building. They have a budget to keep changing the art all the time. It was the home of the Iron Lung, and also the home of a method of treating clubfoot, where they do massage and bindings and gradually get children with club feet to have their feet grow normally, so that they don't even ever need surgery. The University of Iowa Children's Hospital is right next to the University of Iowa Stadium. So this presented an opportunity for them on their top floor to put windows all along that side that faces the stadium. And it's closed to visitors other than parents of the children on football days. And they can roll up their wheelchairs or their chairs and watch the game from the windows. And so during halftime, the people who are sitting in these stands all turn and face the Children's Hospital and do the wave, which I think is really kind of fun thing to do. I wouldn't mind doing that. The other thing in Iowa City to see is the Grant Wood House. Grant Wood, of course, was a famous artist from that area. And he did live in Cedar Rapids for a while. His father died when he was only 4. They were a rural family. His mother, and he had a mother and sister. They moved into Cedar Rapids and he went to school there. He had his studio, though, in Iowa City, and was later on the faculty at the University of Iowa. So here's a self-portrait of him and the boyhood home where he grew up in Cedar Rapids. But in Iowa City, he lived up here. Now, he was already a pretty famous artist, but he lived in this little studio, he and his mother. And you'll see some pictures that you will recognize. This is his sister, Nan. She posed for quite a few of his pictures. The American Gothic, and this is their dentist. So this is not a preacher and his wife. It is actually a farmer. You see, he's got his overalls on, but he's put this jacket on for the portrait. And his daughter. So it's supposed to be a farmer and his daughter. And Grant Wood looked for a proper background. He found this particular home in Eldon, Iowa. Here is some people. Also, one of them is his sister and 2 other ladies. These are the DAR ladies, I think. They're pretty sour looking, but all kinds of places in Iowa. And when he made some trips to Germany, working on a project I'm going to tell you about in a minute, he started looking at some pictures there and was taken by some artists who painted stories in their pictures. So each of these has a story. So here are the famous the DAR ladies with their sour-looking faces, and they're tiny little teacup, you see. But they're with the picture of the Wing Victory. Some of the Iowa scenery. So this is where he lived. He and his mother lived here. This is the project that took him to Germany because they couldn't make this glass in the United States. This is in the Veterans Memorial window. It's on that Mays Island that flooded so badly. So it was damaged, but it was able to be repaired. And this, again, Nan was his model for this. This is the victory, or the angel, I guess you call it. Down below are the pictures of the wars that had been fought, the veterans of the wars up to this point. And I might have that on another page. Oh, yes. Don't have that right in front of me. But there were, starting with the Revolutionary War, different wars that the soldiers had been in. These are all privates. They are not generals. So this is 24 feet by 20 feet across. So it's a huge project. And it took several years to make all these glass pieces and have them shipped. And after, of course, this was dated, I think, with World War I. And later on, there were 3 other monuments built within this building for the World War II, the Iwo Jima that we're used to with the flag raising, and also the Korean War and the Vietnam War.
Mary, did he paint that and then have the glass people do it? Or did Grant Wood do the glass?
He didn't paint it. He and his assistant laid out the dimensions of this, because as you stand on the floor, you know how perspective makes things look smaller as you go up. So he made sure, he got up on a 16-foot ladder and made sure that all of this was going to look right proportionally from the floor. But no, he made a drawing of it, extensive drawings of what went into each of these panels. And then the glass was made in Germany. It was supposed to be made in the United States, but they couldn't do it.
I see.
It's from a glass in Munich, a glass factory in Munich that actually made the glass and had it shipped over here. But yes, it took a couple of years to do all of it.
Thank you.
Let me see what we got. There's more of his paintings and other paintings of local artists in Cole College. Cole College is in Cedar Rapids, but it doesn't have its own art gallery. So these are all in the library. People were studying and in study carrels and so forth as we were going around looking at various pictures. So here are a few of the pictures that I was talking about, the original American Gothic with the people who posed for those pictures, his sister and his dentist, the house in Eldon. And as you can see, he's changed it a little bit, elongating a little bit, artist privilege, right? One of the interesting things too that we saw just very near Iowa City, between Iowa City and Cedar Rapids, was the Devonian and Raptor centers. The Devonian Gorge, Fossil Gorge, the Devonian era in the deep time is about 375 million years old. This is a couple million years before dinosaurs. It's some of the oldest rock we've had. And a couple of these floods have washed away some of this exterior rock to show fossils in the gorge. And you can then let you walk through and take pictures of them. You can't take the fossils out, but you can photograph them. It's part of the Coralville Lake area. So there's a state park at Coralville with camping grounds, and I think maybe even cabins that you can rent. And they're hiking trails and all kinds of things that you would find in a nice state park. So this is part of the state park, this whole area, and this would be the Devonian Gorge. Here's the University of Iowa in Iowa City. Cedar Rapids would be up here. So it's in that area. And these are some pictures actually that Judy took. This was the day I forgot my camera. So these are pictures that she took that day, but you can see the fossils are very clearly in the rocks. The Raptor Center is also as part of Coralville Park. And it is a center to rescue birds that have been wounded and couldn't fly anymore. And they're all the, what do they call them? Raptor projects, or they're birds of prey. And you get an idea of how big they can be with Judy extending her arms. But here are some of the birds that migrate through there. And they have about 17 birds. They had 17 when we were there. Bald eagles, golden eagles, great horned owls, peregrine falcons, turkey vultures, kestrels, Harris hawk. And of course, you see that she has one of the owls that was very tame, and told us about their project there, because they do other things besides just show tourists. They monitor the raptor populations and look at their nesting habits and ban some of the ones that come through and so forth. So it's a monitoring station for some of these birds in that area that migrate through there. We had lunch nearby in a nice restaurant here at the dam in Coralville. One of the fun things to do in Iowa is to see the Amish colonies, and there are other places, the Amana colonies as well. We went to Kelowna, And it was a very interesting place. We started out with coffee and donuts in the local shop. But I'm sorry, I'm going to have a drink. No sneezing though. So both the Amish and Mennonite live in the area, and they have combined to make this museum and archives in a whole little village. There are a number of buildings. We had a little talk first about what's included in this in the Kelowna colonies. You see the end of a mural. I'm going to show you the rest of it in just a second. And of course, what they're trying to do is preserve their past. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the differences between Amish and Mennonites when we get through our tour here of the village. But this is to preserve the past and of what life was like 100 years or so ago. I have some chairs very much like those. And of course, you know the term sleep tight, and that means that since you didn't have a spring mattress under there, you pulled these ropes tight so that you wouldn't sag in the middle, and sleep tight so the bed bugs won't bite, right? Here's an old stove, very much like my grandmother had back in the day. And an old organ like my ex-husband's grandmother had, and she didn't pass it down to us, unfortunately, but to another musician in the family. The pot-bellied stove. And here we have the trundle bed. You may be familiar with these kinds of quilts that ladies would get together if someone was establishing a new home, a little bridal shower kind of thing, and they would embroider their names on them and put them together in a quilt. There's another beautiful quilt with wildflowers in the back of it, and another one back here. So if you're a quilt lover, these are definitely the places to come. This I found interesting because I'm doing ancestry work. This is the family and all their ancestors. Of course, this is where you would take a bath, a little close-up of that, and you see how many thousands of people just one couple can generate in a couple generations. And another way to do a family history in a big chart would be this: the parents, their children, and each of their families. There's about 5 generations, I think, in this one. I have a hat very much like this one, so I was impressed with that hat, and some patterns to make quilt patterns. Here's that mural I was talking about. The end of it, it shows some of the Mennonite or Amish, could be either one by the dress. You can't really tell from that. The house, kind of houses they lived on, it goes along here. What life would have been like in those times. Tools, these would be carpenter tools. Again, my ex-husband grew up on a farm, and he was familiar with that. His dad was a carpenter. So he collected a lot of these tools, and we had a bunch of them around the house. Now my son has them, and he's collecting them. One of the things we bought on a trip to Wisconsin to see my parents one summer was one of these. We saw one in a antiques shop just by the side of the road in Arkansas, and never had seen one before. I've only seen 3 since, but they were all in museums. I didn't know what it was until I saw one in a museum. Does anybody know what they are? You want to take a guess? You can guess in chat if you like. I'm going to tell you in the meantime, though, that it's got inches along the side, and it's to measure wagon wheels. So my mother was kind of an antique collector, and it hung on her wall for a long time. And when we discovered how rare they were, she said, well, I'll leave it to him in my will. Well, when I die, he can have it. Well, of course, when she died, no, it was nowhere to be found. So someone else in my family has it, and they don't know what it is, but they're quite rare. Some other things that you might like. Here's a little close-up of that other quilt. Hummel figures. My mother had some. I bet you've had some, or your mom did.
Mary, there's a question that's kind of relevant. Is the Amish like a living colony, or is it just a historical thing there, or the Mennonites?
They live in that area. They live in that area. Yeah, they do. They live in that area. And I'll tell you more about how this got started in just a minute. I got some more to tell you about that.
Okay.
So there are lots of quilts, of course, in their museum. Sewing machine, pot-belly stove. I learned to sew on one of these old Singers. I bet you did too. Children's toys. But beautiful work on these. some of the types of clothes they wore. They're very plain. Usually just a solid color. They don't like anything very fancy. So yes, there are Amish and Mennonites living in the area. The Amish tend to still do the buggies. Now they're the more conservative. The Mennonites do have more modern things. They will have phones and electricity, but normally the Amish do not have electricity to their homes. They don't have cars. Now you might see them with cell phones though, which I find very interesting. I've seen them in Pennsylvania with cell phones at some of the where they're selling produce and things like that. So there was a guy named Wall, W-H-A-L, and he was the one who set up this, started this Amish village on property that he had. And it was this town of Kelowna was next to a railroad track. And remember back in the early days of railroad, there were steam engines. And so you had to have a water tower in order to have steam. And so about every 7 miles, there was a water tower. And the towns kind of grew up around these water towers. This building right here, which we'll see in some other pictures, is the railroad station. And I'm not sure where the water tower is. It's along here. So he donated this property which is alongside the railroad track. And it had the water tower. He bought the water tower for $50. And then bought the railroad station. So this little village has, it's a typical 1800s village. It has all kinds of things. There is a welcome center, but then there's also a church and a wash house where you went to take your washing, a well, and the house where the Walls lived, which I think I've got a picture of as we go through. A log house, a schoolhouse, a post office, general store, the train depot, which was that red building we just saw the side of, a loom house with the spinning wheel in it, a grandpa house. We would call them mother-in-law suites. But if you're a farm community, you built a grandpa house next to your house so that your parents, when they retire and they say, I'm old, I don't have to do this anymore, they moved into a little house, probably a tiny house next door to the main house. There was a line shaft building, the water tank, of course, the windmill, an agricultural museum, and the Mennonite Museum and Archives, and the Quilt Museum. So there are a bunch of things to see here. We could spend all day here. In fact, we did spend all day there. So the Amish and the Mennonites both came out of the Anabaptist tradition in Switzerland. They were Protestants. They had broken, of course, Protestant church had broken away from the Catholic Church. They called themselves Anabaptist, meaning they didn't believe in baptizing infants. They thought you needed to be an adult to agree to be baptized. So that group of people were thrown out of some countries. They ended up in Switzerland, as I said, but most of the people were from France, Germany, and Switzerland. Originally, they were all what we would call Mennonites, but then the Amish decided to break away from even them, to be stricter, to have less of the worldly things around them and keep to the old ways. So despite these shared roots, and they still have the same beliefs religiously, but the way they live is a little bit different. So the Mennonites are not quite as conservative as the Amish. And the Amish still depend on farming for the most part. And the Mennonites tend to be, will send their kids to more modern schools and things like that and have other occupations. The Amish still wear the plain dress, as you saw hanging up there, rather than the modern clothes. This is the train station and the church, two of the churches. This one was turned into an antique shop in Kelowna. The school, and I had desks like that when I first went to school. I don't know about you, the inkwell, the log house. And this would be the train station here, this red building, and they go all the way back into here. So it was also auction day when we were in Kelowna, and we were there on Thursday. So Thursday is cattle and hay day. And this is my friend Edward, and he's chatting up the farmer who's brought hay in. We see other kinds of ways to bale hay. And if you're a farmer, you just deal with the people who bring these in right in the parking lot. And this little gal here was had some exotic animals. She had a pony and a llama and goats and all sorts of things that she was feeding. So he's giving her the good news here. So this is actually a video, and I did not hold it down long enough. When they auction off cattle, this is cattle in heyday, cattle comes in through this door, walks around and out this door in a roughly 5 to 6 minutes, seconds. He just walks in and out, and somebody raises a hand and you've bought yourself a cow. So I started the video and was fooling around with it. And so this is the shortest video you will ever see. That's it. Sorry about that. That's the best I could do with that video, but you get the idea. Okay, one of my interests was Grant Wood, of course, as you've seen, and the other was Herbert Hoover, who had lived in West Branch, which is, again, in the area. And he was president of the United States, as you know, during the Depression and got a really bad name, did not win re-election. He was a one-term president. However, he turned out to be much more interesting than I thought he would be. So just looking very briefly through him, he was a fisherman. He liked to, this is where he was born. And later on, he and his wife had this house. He was a mining engineer, but he came from a Quaker family, and both of his parents died very young. He was sent off to Oregon to live with an uncle. So he only went to school till age 13, never went to high school, but he was apprenticed to his uncle and learned things at night. He went to night school just to learn things on his own. So he was very ambitious himself. And about the time he was about 18, Stanford University was opening up for the first time in 1891, and he applied to enter college, never having been to high school, as a beginning student at Stanford, and he was accepted. He didn't do very well. He didn't pass any of the tests except math to get into Stanford, but for some reason they let him in. And he changed majors a couple of times. He started out in geology, ended up in mining engineering. He was also a humanitarian, and though he was a Republican all of his life and served in Republican politics, he definitely believed in the value of all people and was a humanitarian. He really won his he called a worldwide consultant, but he really earned some, I don't know what you want to call it, his notoriety, I guess, as helping refugees during World War II. Americans were stranded when Belgium was invaded by Germany, and he was able to get a lot of people out and to send supplies because they were starving. And also after the war to have aid sent to people in Europe who were really under great duress. So this is some of the things that he's known for as a humanitarian. Also the Boxer Rebellion, there were Americans stranded in China. So he kind of came to the attention of people in the Republican Party. And he then served as Secretary of Commerce. So when he was a mining engineer, he went to Australia, and one of the things he did was the company he was working for, he persuaded them to buy this old mine, which turned out to be the biggest gold mine in Australia. So he became very wealthy out of it. And by the time he was still a young man, he was a millionaire. But he had all kinds of irons in the fire all over the world. And as Secretary of Commerce, he was responsible for all sorts of projects. He was kind of a project guy and an organizer. He loved organizing stuff, even in college. So like the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Hoover Dam, these are all projects of his. He had a lot of conservation projects, one of the few that really started conservation, protecting coastal waters, salmon fisheries, standardizing lumber sizes, standardizing tools, hardware, roads and systems. Every state had their own system of roads and parts for cars, all this kind of stuff. So if you have standardized stuff all across the country, it's because of Herbert Hoover. Lights on freeway or roads, when freeways, of course, then on airports. new long-term home mortgages. There wasn't such a thing until then. Flood relief, the 8-hour workday, on and on and on. National parks increased by 40% under his child protection laws. He really did a lot of good for the country and was then elected president, as I said. But the problem was, of course, he had no idea how to deal with that economy. He married Lou Henry, who was a beautiful woman and also in that first class at Stanford, the first woman to enter Stanford, and right from the beginning. And she was an independent girl. And I think her little quote here is interesting. She was a real free spirit. So when she met Herbert Hoover, it was a match made in heaven. So he easily won, but he didn't win re-election because he couldn't figure out how to get us out of that big depression. He knew it was coming, but he couldn't do anything about it. So here are just some of his accomplishments, some of which I've already talked about and some not. And this is going to be toward the end of my presentation. I'm just going to show you a little bit of some of the buildings in the Hoover area, the park, some of the homes. The home that they retired to is on the Stanford University, is now at the home of the Stanford presidents of the Stanford University. Oops, sorry. His father was a carpenter, as I said, but he died very young. He had one brother, Theo, Tad. Our farewell party was at a winery, which was had a lot of wildflowers and some interesting sculptures out in the backyard, right out on the farm fields, and a place for outdoor activities. And that was the way we ended our stay in Cedar Rapids. Lovely people, as we say. I'm sure there are Evergreeners in the house in the area who are just as welcoming as our hosts were there. So I thank you. And if we have questions, we can look at those real quick.
Okay, we do have some questions. Let's see. Does the Cedar River flow into the Mississippi?
The Cedar River flows into another river. I think it's called the Iowa River, if I'm not mistaken. It is on a map, and I used to know that. And that flows into the Mississippi. It's not a direct flow, but yes, there's a huge basin of rivers that flow into the Mississippi from there, but into various channels. Yeah.
Okay.
So all those were flooded.
So someone is wanting to know if Keokuk, Keeoukuk, Iowa, in relation to the location you were describing. It was very early on.
I'm not sure where that is. Let's say we really went to just that southeast area. I know I've been asked about bridges in Madison County too, which was not near where we were. I don't know where Keokuk is. I'm not all that familiar with Iowa. I know where Des Moines and Ames are, and that's about it.
And just, you can put that into Google Maps, whoever asked the question, and it'll show you.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Mahoney did, I believe.
Yeah,
I asked the question. It's on the Mississippi River, but I'm not. That's why I was just curious when you were talking about Duquesne. But I think it's probably more central.
Okay.
Type of thing.
Okay. Well, you know, I think
But my ancestors are from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, since people are going to be leaving exactly at 8 o'clock because of another program. So I think we can do the dove poppers in 4 minutes. So Mary, thank you very much. That you always find so many interesting things in these cities that we often drive through or around. And so
Mary, one quick comment from 1985 through 1990, I was a manufacturer's representative for Manning Lighting.
No way.
Yes.
You knew my father's brother.
Well, I knew mostly the customer service people at that level and, doing that. So we're going to bring in our